The first code we're going to talk about, or the first success key that I'm going to talk about, is attitude. Attitude. Now, I believe that attitude should have been taught and should still be taught in schools. Part of the reason for that is because if you understand the significance of your attitude in your life, to your success, happiness, joy, wealth, prosperity, health, if you understand the significance of attitude in everything that you do, then you realize that it should have been one of the most important subjects that you and I were taught at a very young age. I believe that even before you start learning how to read and write, you need to understand the importance of attitude. And why would I say that, and why do I think it's really that important? Well, you see, you and I are unique. Although we're different, we have something in common. We have a mind, and the mind is universal. There is only one mind, and you and I have a mind. And the way our mind works is our mind is somewhat separated into two parts. Some call it the upper half, and some call the other the lower half. Some other call it your subconscious mind, which is the lower part, or your conscious mind, which is the upper part. Irrespective of what you choose to call it, something is certain, that there are two aspects of your mind. The first is your conscious. I'm going to use the word conscious. And your conscious mind is very unique. It's your rational mind. It's your analytical mind. It's where you have your five senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. These senses are used as inputs for information to come into your mind. But interestingly, you have a lower section of your mind, which is your subconscious mind, which is what we call your emotional mind. It's the most powerful part of your mind. It has no ability to think. So whatever you impress on your mind is almost taken as truth by your subconscious mind and is put to work. Your subconscious mind requires emotion. So if you have an idea or a thought in your conscious mind, then you emotionalize that thought, that moves down to your subconscious mind. If you impress it on your subconscious mind consistently and continuously, it becomes impressed, and whatever that thought you have starts to create the physical manifestation of that idea. But let's go back a step. You and I think. When we think in pictures. Now, if I were to say to you to think about the word father, something comes to the screen of your mind. It could be a picture of your father. It could be a picture of someone you know that is a father or who was a father. But a picture comes to your mind. The words and the letters of the word father, F-A-T-H-E-R, doesn't appear on the screen of your mind because we think in pictures. Therefore, your attitude is simply a habit of how you think. It's simply habitualized thoughts. And the more you become habitualized in the way you think, those thoughts form habits. Those habits create your attitude. Your attitude then determines the result you have in your life. Now, it's important you understand the reason why attitude is one of the most important keys, and in my choice today, the first key to success. I found, looking back at my life, that in every area that I've fallen short of what I could have achieved, in every area that I perhaps look back and I say with some level of regret or some level of resentment towards myself, I look back and I say, it had nothing to do with circumstances. It had nothing to do with events. It had nothing to do with people, but it had everything to do with my attitude. You see, it's not what happens to you that determines the quality of your life. It's what you do. It's how you respond. It's how you think. Nothing has any meaning in life except the meaning that you give it, except the power that you give it. And Shakespeare said something that I think is very important. Shakespeare said, that nothing is either good or bad, but your thinking makes it so. And so you and I have a responsibility to become what I call masters in how to live and how to create a positive mental attitude. There are three parts of attitude that I want to talk to you about and how it's manifested in your life. One is thought. Number one, what I think to be the most important thing that we should study is where thoughts come from. Where are they lodged? How do we control them? How do we change them? How do we discriminate in what we allow into our lives in terms of ideas and information? We have these five senses that I mentioned, but how do we become sensitive and selective in the information we allow into our lives? So the first part of you changing your attitude is recognizing and understanding that one of the component parts is thoughts. The second is speech. By speech, I mean spoken words. What you say comes from how you think. But what you say in many cases is more powerful, because when you speak, some say the word became flesh. In other words, when you speak, you've taken a thought that was in the mind and you've given it physical form. You've allowed it to come into this world that we have. And so for many people, we have to be very careful about what we say. We also have to be careful about not just our spoken words, but our internal speech. I'm going to talk about the importance of self-talk, something that I think we all should really get really skilled at how to talk to ourselves. It's important we know how to talk to other people, but it also is very vital that we know how to talk to ourselves. The third pillar to your attitude is your behavior. What you do. First, what you think. Second, what you say. Third, what you do. Now, if you can get those three components right, it's possible to create a really beautiful and empowering mental attitude. Now, let's assume that perhaps, like me and like I used to be, that you've come to a point where you want to make a change. And perhaps the result you're getting in the various categories of your life that you consider to be important, it could be financial, it could be business, who knows, it could be relational, it could be health. Let's assume whatever category you might have created for your life, let's assume that you want different results. How do you go about changing it? Now, from the moment you were born and from the moment I was born, all of the inputs have fed into our mind. Perhaps let me qualify and maybe go back one step and just explain something that I think would be useful. How do you develop your attitude? But it's very simple. I think about this analogy. First, you need inputs. You need information coming in. The information that comes in has to be contained and processed. And then the information goes out. So you have inputs, you have output, but in between you have a process. You and I, in order to create the right attitude we need, and interestingly, the attitude you have today is based on those three steps. From the time you were a child, all of the inputs you've had were fed into your mind. You processed the ideas, and part of that processing came through various ways. Modeling other people, observing other people, doing, and then those ideas and processed information became solidified as habits and attitudes, and then you then acted on those ideas by outputs, by taking action. And so the best way to form a new attitude, and also the best way to rid yourself of an old habit or attitude, is to follow the three steps. Firstly, inputs, and that comes down to what you hear, what you see, perhaps what you allow to influence you in terms of your environment. Now, did you know that your environment is more powerful than your heredity? Well, you have genes, but your environment is more powerful. You can get someone who's been perhaps born into a family that has good genes, and if you take that young child at a young age and put them in a different environment, their future is more likely to be based on the influence that their environment has on them than the genes that they were born with. That's how powerful inputs have on you. So you and I must become selective in what we hear, what we see, and the environment we put ourselves in, what we allow to influence us. Now, that is the starting point if you're trying to develop a new attitude. So the first question you would ask yourself is, who would I want to be? The person I'm trying to be, what kind of attitude would they have? With that information, you can begin with the end in mind, walk backwards, find out what type of information that they will be surrounding themselves with. So for example, we're talking about success. You know, and I would imagine that you do, that successful people surround themselves with positive, empowering, enlightening, educational information. That could be by reading good books, by listening to good audio material, by surrounding themselves with people that are better than them and who can positively influence them. So you can take the same approach and say, from today, I'm going to start associating with people who are consistent with the person that I'd like to be in the future. That is input. Now, once you've gathered that input and it starts to filter into your mind, the second stage is how you process that information. And that is where your philosophy comes in, which is how you think, how you process ideas, how you process information, how you intelligently select what to put aside and what to choose. Now, that in itself is a skill, and that simply comes with practice, repetition, interaction with the right people, and having a mind that is open to the idea of acquiring more and more wisdom. It comes when you want to be a learner. And finally, when you've received all that information, and you've processed the information, and you've sorted out the good and that which is not for you, the most important thing is then to take action. To then start acting like that person you want to become. And you find that when you start, it feels a little bit abnormal, unusual, uncomfortable. But the more you do it, what you find is that over a certain period of perhaps days, months, that you formulate new habits through repetition, through consistency, through discipline. You form new habits, and those habits over time change your attitude. Now let's take another viewpoint, which is what happens if you already have an attitude that you don't really like? How do you get rid of it? Well, you and I will never have the option of going back and being born again as kids. But what we can do is learn what we call the law of substitution. If you walk into a room such as this, how do you get the light in this room to leave? Well, there are various ways of doing it. You hit the light switch and the light goes out and darkness comes in. You walk back into the room, how do you get the darkness to leave? You hit the light switch, the light comes in and it displaces the darkness. So we use a principle called the law of displacement. How do you get rid of an old idea? How do you get rid of an old habit, an attitude? By displacing those ideas with a new idea. Now, someone once said something that I think was very beautiful, and I'd like to share that with you. I believe it was Buckminster Fuller. Yes, it was Bucky. Buckminster Fuller said that you cannot change an idea, an old idea, an old habits, an old philosophy by trying to rid yourself of that philosophy or idea or habit. That to create change, to create something new, that you first have to develop a new idea that displaces the old idea. So the option of getting rid of an old habit or getting rid of an attitude doesn't exist, because the mind always needs pictures and it always needs ideas and thoughts what you have to do is substitute one good idea for an old idea. And the more you repeat that process through repetition, over time, what you find is the old idea disappears and goes away. And now you have a new habit, a new attitude. So if you're hoping to change your attitude, and I had to do this, and I still do this every single time at various areas of my life, I simply ask myself a question. If I were to project my life forward 2 years and 3 years and 6 months, or whatever the time might be, who would I have to be in character for someone to say he has the right attitude for the job, or he has the right attitude for what we're trying to achieve, or he has the right attitude for the relationship? And then what I do is I simply start to act like that person I want to be. I start to model those attitudes, and I start to regularly cleanse, flush, saturate my mind with those new ideas that are related to that new person that I want to be. And I find that over time, by repetition, I displace the old habits, the old attitude, and now I have a new habit. And that is the same principle that you can use. So let me bring this to a very nice conclusion. The first key that I would recommend for success is attitude. The attitude about how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the past, and how you feel about the future. Now, interestingly, for those of you who perhaps have read the book Psycho-Cybernetics, if you haven't, it's a really good investment. I believe it will be one of the best investments you've made, or you make. And the reason is simple. The author of the book was someone called Maxwell Maltz, Dr. Maxwell Maltz. He was a plastic surgeon, very experienced, very well respected and renowned. And over a course of, I think about 30 or 40 years or 50 years, I can't remember, he had studied and he had worked as a surgeon. And part of his responsibility was to help people who had scars on their body. That if someone came and they had perhaps a deformation, that he would surgically operate on them and he would correct their defects. And he came up with something really fascinating, which was that each and every one of us, we have a picture of who we think we are. He found that there were occasions whereby he had very successfully operated on someone, whatever the scar might have been, perhaps wherever the defect might have been, or perhaps wherever the situation might have been that he was being looked up to remedy it. He found even after successfully operating and achieving exactly what the patient wanted, when they stood in front of the mirror and they looked at themselves, they still saw themselves the way they imagined themselves to be, the way they saw themselves in their mind. And he was fascinated by that, because here he was with this patient and they looked beautiful. The surgery had gone well, the scar was gone, they looked beautiful, just the way they wanted, just the way they described it to him. However, when standing with the patient was still depressed. Why? Because in their mind's eye, they still saw themselves as perhaps with the same scars. Perhaps they saw themselves as perhaps unwanted. They saw themselves in their mind's eye as having the same defects. And he came up with a simple concept, which was that we all have a self-image. Now, I'm not going to go into the self-image idea right now, but here is the point I'm trying to make. If I were to ask you who you are, you may describe yourself as a doctor, a banker, a lawyer, a dentist, perhaps a teacher, whatever that might be. You'd be telling me about your profession. You might tell me you have a beautiful home, you have your kids, a family. You'd be telling me about things that matter the most to you. You might say, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm 30, I'm 50, I'm 20. That's your age. You might even say I'm black, I'm West African, I'm Northern African, perhaps you might say I'm Asian, I'm Chinese, you might even say I'm American. You'll be telling them about your ethnicity and where you're from, where you were born, but that's not you. All of those are not you. It's not what you have in possessions that defines you. You see, most of us have an idea about who we are. And to an extent, that idea that we have has been formed and fashioned by how we've been thinking. So to someone who thinks, I'm not good enough, they will always act like the person that they think they are. And it doesn't matter how much you try to encourage the person, and you stand in front of the mirror and say, can you not see how beautiful you are? Can you not see how great you are? Can you not see that you have unlimited potentiality within you? Can you not see that you have success engineered into you? They can't see it. Why? Because the thoughts they have in their mind and the attitude they have about themselves is distorted. What you have to do is help the person, or maybe help yourself, go back and re-engineer that self-image. And that begins, firstly, changing your thoughts, changing your speech, internal dialogue, or spoken words, and number 3, changing what you do. So, principle number 1, if you want to be successful, the first key you need for success